The red lipstick lay at the bottom of the shipyard water, sinking through oil and foam, when Elena realized she had stopped being anyone's wife. But that was not the beginning. The beginning was 6 months earlier, in a bathroom mirror, when she pulled a yellowed index card from behind the cabinet and whispered a name to a stranger's face. 13 hours before the lipstick dissolved into the dark water, the alarm showed 6:30 a.m. Elena's fingers trembled as she gripped the chrome faucet. Cold water rushed over her palms, and she cupped it twice to her face, gasping as the shock traveled through her temples. Droplets clung to her pale eyelashes, catching the morning light from the bathroom's frosted window. She held still like that, bent over the white porcelain sink, watching the water swirl down the drain. She straightened slowly. The frameless mirror reflected a woman she did not recognize. Pale skin, carefully contoured cheekbones, eyes that looked practiced at appearing empty. She moved quickly, reaching behind the mirror cabinet's edge. Her fingers found the yellowed index card she had hidden there weeks ago or months ago. Time moved strangely now. The card was thin, fragile. One sentence was written in blue ink, the handwriting shaky but deliberate. Your name is Elena, and you like jazz. Elena held the card close to her face, reading it as if the words might change. They didn't. At 7 a.m. exactly, she heard Julian's footsteps approaching the bathroom door. She emerged into the living room to find him standing by the front door, already dressed in his charcoal designer suit. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, like a man admiring an acquisition. His hair was perfect, his tie was perfect, his smile was a knife edge. "Good morning, darling," he said, and his voice was soft, syrupy, dangerous. "I've prepared something for you." He held out a silver tray. On it sat a single white porcelain cup filled with herbal tea. Steam rose from the surface in delicate spirals. The spoon clinked against the cup as he moved the tray slightly, adjusting it as if the angle of her breakfast mattered. Elena looked at the tea. She had learned not to refuse these offerings. "You aren't ready for the world today," Julian continued, his smile never wavering. "Drink your tea." She took one step toward him, then another. Her bare feet were cold on the marble floor. She was still wearing her white silk nightgown, the one he had selected for her. As she passed him, she reached for the brass doorknob. His free hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was not tight at first. It was almost gentle, the way one might hold something precious. But then his fingers tightened. The pressure increased. His knuckles turned white, dead white, and Elena felt the bones in her wrist shift slightly, grinding together. "Where are you going?" His voice remained soft. "I wanted to walk," Elena heard herself say. "Just a short walk." "The world isn't ready for you yet," he whispered. She slammed her shoulder into his chest. The silver tray flew upward. The white cup rotated through the air in slow motion, and the hot tea spilled out in an amber arc. It landed across Julian's silk tie and spread in a dark stain down the front of his designer shirt. Some splattered onto the white carpet, creating a brown bloom that would not wash out. Julian hissed and released her wrist, stumbling backward. Elena shoved him again, hard with everything she had left. His body crashed into the glass-topped side table. The glass didn't break, but it rattled violently, and Julian's head snapped backward from the impact. Elena yanked the heavy wooden door open. The hallway stretched before her in fluorescent-lit emptiness. She ran, her bare feet slapping against the cold concrete, the sound echoing behind her like a drumbeat. Behind her, she heard Julian's voice calling her name, not angry, but something worse. Sad, disappointed. The tone of a man who might forgive her for trying to escape. She didn't look back. The basement of the café was damp and smelled like old coffee grounds and mold. Marcus sat at a stained wooden table, his back to the single flickering light bulb that swung slightly overhead. He was smoking a cigarette, and ash fell onto the floor in a fine gray powder. As Elena descended the stairs, he didn't look up. He simply slid a leather folder across the table toward her. "You have 5 minutes," he said, his voice rough from years of tobacco use. "Then you need to disappear." Elena opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, pages and pages of transactions. She saw her signature on each one, her actual signature, not forged. The accounts were offshore. The sums were enormous. $50,000, $120,000, $87,000. Each number made her head spin. "What is this?" she whispered. Marcus pointed to a glossy photograph tucked into the folder. It showed Elena and Julian standing together in what appeared to be a ballroom, both dressed in formal wear. They were holding a trophy together. Gold, heavy-looking. A banner behind them read, "Investors of the Year." In the photo, Elena looked radiant, powerful, alive. "You didn't lose your identity," Marcus said, and his voice was cold, devoid of sympathy. "You helped him kill it to hide the money." Elena's hand gripped the edge of the table so hard that her fingernails left marks in the wood. The person in the photograph was the person she used to be. Not a wife, not a victim. A criminal, or something worse. Someone who had been complicit in her own erasure. She looked at the most recent date on the bank statements. October 23rd. Yesterday. "The money moved while I was trapped," Elena said. "You were never trapped," Marcus replied. He stood, dropping his cigarette to the floor and crushing it under his heel. Not by him. He was just the lock. He left her alone in the basement with the folder. Elena sat there for a long time, not moving, not breathing, just staring at the photograph of a woman she used to be. The red phone booth was an anachronism. They had been almost extinct for 20 years. But this one still stood on the corner of 5th and Morrison, and its interior reeked of stale urine and desperation. Rain drummed against the glass panels with mechanical precision. Elena stood inside the booth, her burner phone vibrating in her palm like a living thing. She answered before it could ring twice. "Elena." Julian's voice came through distorted, as if filtered through a speaker designed to dehumanize sound. In the background, she heard crying. Muffled, duct-taped crying. Then the sound of tape being ripped from skin. "Sarah?" Elena called into the phone. "You have 2 hours to bring the drive to the shipyard," Julian said. And she could hear the smile in his voice. That same knife-edge smile from the morning. It was the voice of someone who had just won something precious. "Warehouse 9. Bring the drive, and your sister lives. Don't bring it, and I make her disappear permanently. Not death, Elena. Something worse. I erase her." The line went dead. Elena looked at her watch. 1:35 p.m. She understood immediately what had happened. The burner phone had a tracker. He had been following her all along. She stepped out of the booth and tossed the phone into the back of a passing garbage truck. It disappeared into the compressed waste and metal teeth with a satisfying finality. She leaned against the glass wall of the booth and closed her eyes for 3 full seconds. In her mind, she pulled up the blueprints she had memorized years ago. The compliance audit she had conducted on the shipyard facility 3 years before Julian abducted her. She could see the catwalk. She could see the fire suppression system. She could see the exits. She unzipped her designer coat, the beige one Julian approved of, and dropped it into a puddle of rainwater. Underneath, she wore a black hoodie, not chosen for her, not approved, just black and warm in hers. The warehouse was cavernous, and the air inside tasted like rust and salt. Shipping containers were stacked like tombstones, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Dust motes drifted through the high windows like ghosts. Elena moved carefully, crouched low, her eyes tracking the space above and around her. A guard dropped from a container behind her, his arms locked around her torso, pinning her arms to her sides. She felt the impact like a collision, felt the air drive out of her lungs. Before she could recover, a second guard appeared and swept her legs. She fell hard onto the concrete, her cheeks scraping against the unforgiving surface. She tasted blood. It was bitter and real and the most honest thing that had happened to her in 6 months. The guard's forearm was inches from her mouth. Elena bit down hard through the sleeve of his jacket. She felt fabric and skin and the give of muscle. She bit harder. He screamed and released her. She twisted her body and drove her heel upward in a perfect strike against the second guard's instep. She heard the crunch of small bones breaking. He howled and limped backward, his weight favoring his other leg. A third guard emerged from the shadows, swinging a lead pipe in a broad arc. Elena rolled across a wooden pallet. The pipe connected with the wood instead, splintering it into shards. Without thinking, Elena grabbed a hook attached to a chain, one of the old rigging hooks from the shipyard's operational days. The rust came off on her palm. She swung the chain. The hook caught the third guard's shoulder, biting into flesh and cloth. She pulled with all her weight, and he stumbled forward, directly into a stack of empty metal barrels. His body hit them like a wrecking ball. The sound was deafening, a thunderous crash of steel on concrete. Dust rose in a thick cloud. Elena stood in the center of the warehouse, breathing heavily, her hands shaking with adrenaline and violence. The metal stairs clanged under her feet as she climbed. At the top of the catwalk, Elena saw a figure bound to a chair. Silver duct tape covered the lower half of the face. Wide eyes, Sarah's eyes, stared at her. Elena moved quickly to her sister and reached for the tape. Sarah shook her head violently from side to side, her body language screaming a warning that Elena's mind was too flooded with adrenaline to interpret. Elena ripped the tape away carefully, peeling it from skin. Sarah stood up immediately. The ropes around her wrists were slack. They had been loose the entire time. She pulled a small taser from her pocket. Blue electricity crackled at its tip. "I'm sorry, Elle," Sarah said, and her voice was flat, robotic, the voice of someone reading from a script. "He pays better than your morals ever did." Elena stepped backward. Her heel hit the railing. Below her, the warehouse floor was a 50-foot drop to unforgiving concrete. Above her, the warehouse ceiling disappeared into darkness. Julian emerged from behind a shipping container, and the sight of him made Elena's blood turn to ice water. He was holding the flash drive, her flash drive, the one with all the evidence. But she had hidden that drive, had kept it close to her skin. This was impossible. "I knew you'd bring a fake," Julian said, and his smile was patient, the smile of someone who had already won. "I knew you would prepare some little backup. Now give me the real one, or Sarah pushes you." He held up the flash drive, turning it slowly in the light so the red LED caught and sparkled. Julian produced a lighter from his pocket. He flicked it with a sharp metallic snap. The flame appeared, small, orange, absolute. He held it to a photograph Elena hadn't even known she was carrying. The edges curled immediately. The image began to disappear into ash and charcoal. It was the only photo she had of her parents. Elena watched the faces blacken and curl. The figures twisted as the heat consumed the paper. In seconds, The photograph was nothing but ash, drifting down through the warehouse air like black snow. She felt hollow, not sad, not angry. Hollow, as if someone had opened her chest cavity and removed everything inside, heart, lungs, the small, hard diamond of her will. Julian signaled downward with a flick of his wrist. A guard below pulled a lever. The main power to the warehouse cut out with a sudden, heavy silence. The world turned black, not the natural darkness of nighttime, but the absolute darkness of underground, of tombs, of endings. Julian's lighter remained the only source of light. It cast his face in orange and shadow, making him look demonic. Sarah's silhouette was barely visible, the taser still raised. Elena stood at the edge of the catwalk, trapped between her sister with electricity and her captor with fire. Below her was only falling. To her sides was only the edge. Behind her was only the container. Ahead of her was only the drop. "Give me the drive," Julian whispered, "and I'll let you go." Elena's breath came in shallow gasps. In the darkness, the only thing left was her own voice. The only thing that couldn't be taken, because it was the only thing that had never really belonged to anyone else. She whispered, so quietly that only the darkness could hear. "Elena Vance." Elena's hand moved toward the red lever on the wall. She had touched it 3 years ago during the fire safety audit. She had studied the documentation. She knew exactly what it did. She pulled. The fire suppression system erupted with the fury of a wounded animal. High-pressure foam exploded from nozzles in the ceiling, a thick white flood of chemical retardant that poured down like a blizzard. It filled the air. It filled the darkness. It filled everything. Sarah fired the taser blindly. The electricity found a metal support beam and sparked harmlessly, illuminating the foam in blue for a microsecond before dying. She was coughing, choking on the chemical taste. Julian was doubled over, his eyes watering, his lighter useless against the overwhelming white avalanche. Elena moved through the foam with absolute certainty. She counted her steps. 8 to the railing, 3 along the railing, 7 to the fire escape door. She had memorized this path years ago, and her body remembered what her conscious mind had tried to forget. She was not the woman Julian had created. She was the auditor. She was the inspector. She was the woman who knew the structure of buildings, the flow of systems, the cold logic of infrastructure. As she passed Julian, she felt for his hands. They were shaking, covered in foam. She took the lighter. She took the flash drive. She moved past him like a ghost, like a memory, like a woman who had already died and was only now discovering she could walk. The ground floor was chaos. Fire suppression foam was still falling, though more slowly now. Elena's fingers found her ankle holster, the one she had prepared 3 days ago and hidden under her clothes. Real smartphone. Real backup. She pulled it out and checked the screen. Uploading complete. Green checkmark. The data had been transmitted to the Federal Bureau of Investigation 10 minutes ago. Not just the financial records, not just the evidence. Sarah's recorded confession from the catwalk was included, her voice saying the words that would send her to prison for conspiracy and fraud. In the distance, sirens wailed to life. Elena looked toward the upper catwalk. Julian was stumbling down the metal stairs, covered in foam that clung to his suit like a second skin. He looked like a melting ghost, like a man dissolving in real time. He saw the red and blue lights reflecting off the warehouse windows. He saw the police vehicles arriving outside. He collapsed onto his knees on the concrete floor. Elena stood in the doorway. Rain fell on her black hoodie, washing away the foam, washing away the disguise that was also her reality. She looked at Julian, not as a wife, not as a victim, not even as a woman, but as a prosecutor looks at a defendant. Clinically, without sentiment, without the possibility of mercy. "I didn't rediscover myself tomorrow, Julian," she said, and her voice was steady, resonant with a power that came from something deeper than anger. "I rediscovered myself 3 years ago when I first filed that report. You were just a delay." She walked to the edge of the dock where the shipyard water lapped black and oily against the concrete pilings. She pulled the cherry-red lipstick from her pocket, the one labeled Julian's favorite, crimson. She looked at it for a moment, then released it. It fell in a small arc and disappeared into the water. Ripples spread outward from the impact point, concentric circles that grew larger and fainter until they vanished entirely. Police officers emerged from the rain, their weapons drawn. The alarm clock showed 7 a.m. when Elena's hand, steady, unwavering, reached out and turned it off. She did not open her eyes immediately. She lay in the small bed of her small studio apartment, a place she had chosen herself, a place where every object had been selected by her own hands, approved by her own judgment. When she did open her eyes, the sunlight was warm on her face. The room smelled like coffee and new paint. The walls were bare except for a single corkboard. She rose slowly, her body moving without the tremor that had become second nature over the 6 months of captivity. She looked at herself in the small mirror beside the bed. Her face was unadorned, her skin was pale, and on her forehead, a small scar caught the morning light. A ridge of pink tissue that would never fully fade. A permanent reminder of the shipyard catwalk, the fall she should have taken, but didn't. She smiled at the scar. Elena pulled on a blue t-shirt. Not selected by anyone, not approved by anyone. Just blue because blue was her favorite color, and she was relearning what her favorite color was, one day at a time. On her desk sat a book. Advanced Corporate Law. Her name was printed inside the front cover. Elena Vance, J.D. She opened the window. The city stretched before her in morning light. Traffic sounds, voices, the ordinary chaos of people living ordinary lives. The air was cool and fresh and belonged to no one and everyone. Elena sat at her small desk. She picked up a pen. She took a new index card, crisp white paper, blank and full of possibility. She wrote in careful letters, "I am Elena Vance. I am the one who survived." She pinned it to the corkboard above her desk, next to the newspaper clipping from her professional license restoration, next to the photograph of her parents. A different photograph, a newer one, kept safe in a clear plastic sleeve. She sat and looked at her words for a long time. The morning light moved across the desk, and Elena Vance moved with it. A woman no longer reaching behind mirrors for evidence of her own existence, but rather building that existence forward, minute by minute, word by word, choice by choice, into something that was real and permanent and absolutely her own.